السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Until here, the author gave a very comprehensive explanation on Sahih Ahadith, the definition, etc., the different categories of Sahih Ahadith, or rather the different stages of a Sahih Hadith. Now the author moves on to discuss the next category, and that is the category of Hasan. So while discussing this category of Hasan, he will explain how Hasan could also reach the status of Sahih, and he will also explain that in terms of being used as a proof, Hasan is equal to Sahih. So therefore it was most apt for him to bring this chapter immediately after the chapter of Sahih. Firstly, looking at the word Hasan, Hasan is the opposite of the word Qabih. So Qabih means something which is ugly, something which is detestable. Hasan would mean something that ما تميل إليه النفس وتشتهيه إما عقلا أو هوى أو حسا. That's something which a person feels inclined towards, something which is good. So if this is from the lugwi meaning, and inshallah as we go on we'll discuss the technical meaning. Firstly, before even going into this chapter, if you have to look at a bit of a background on this term, then we find that earlier scholars, so that means scholars in the 3rd and the 4th century, they only had the words sahih and da'if, which they used as official terminologies. So a narration, according to them, was either authentic and they would call it sahih, or it would have been weak and they would call it da'if. When they use the term Hasan, then there is a difference of opinion on what they meant, but it's not necessary that they use the term Hasan as Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is going to discuss here. So it was then only in the 3rd or 4th century that scholars now began to add a middle term, a middle category, and a category between Hasan and Da'if, and they began to call it Hasan. So some scholars claim that Allama Khattabi rahmallah, he was the first to make a separate category. So if it was Allama Khattabi, then to take note of his era, he was born in the year 319 and he passed away in the year 388 after Hijri. Others claim, no, it was Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah. You know that when you are reading Jami' al-Tirmidhi, then so many places you find Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah using the term Hasan. So if it was Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, then he was born in the year 209 and he passed away at 279. So he was born more than 110 years before Allama Khattabi rahimahullah. The main proponent of the first view to say that it was Allama Khattabi rahimahullah, it was Allama Iraqi. So Allama Iraqi rahimahullah, he was the first person to mention that Allama Khattabi is the first person to give a definition to a Hasan narration. So in his Nukat on Muqaddama ibn Salah, Allama Iraqi rahimahullah said, وَلَمْ أَرَ مَنْ سَبَكَ الْخَطَّابِ إِلَى تَقْسِيمِهِ ذَلِكَ وَإِنْ كَانَ فِي كَلَامِ الْمُتَقَدِّمِينَ ذِكْرُ الْحَسَنِ التَّقْيِيدُ وَالْإِيضَاحُ. That's his Nukat. On page 59, he mentions it right in the beginning. So if it's not that front, then it's right in the beginning. So this here is his view, saying that Allama Khattabi rahimahullah is the first. But then on the contrary, you have Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. So he says that it was Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah who was the first person. He says, وَأَوَّلُ مَنْ عَرَّفَ أَنَّهُ قِسْمُ الْحَدِيثِ ثَلَاثَةُ أَقْسَامٍ صَحِيحٌ وَحَسَنٌ وَضَعِيفٌ وَأَبُو عِيسَى التِّرْمِذِيُّ فِي جَامِعِهِ. He mentions this in his Majmu' al-Fatawa in volume 1 on page 252. Then in the 18th volume he said, وَأَمَّا قِسْمَةُ الْحَدِيثِ إِلَى صَحِيحٌ وَحَسَنٌ وَضَعِيفٌ فَهَذَا أَوَّلُ مَنْ عُرِفَ أَنَّهُ قَسَّمَهُ هذه القسمة أبو عيسى الترمذي وَلَمْ تُعْرَفْ هذه القسمة عن أحد قبله. So as we mentioned that Imam Tirmidhi rahmallah, he was born in the year 209, he passed away in the year 279, and is mentioning this term so in so many places in his Jami', in his Sunan. We'll discuss whether it's regarded as Jami' al-Tirmidhi or Sunan al-Tirmidhi. So there are so many places where he's mentioning the term there. So how could such a learned scholar like Allama Iraqi rahmallah claim that it was someone who was born 110 years after Imam Tirmidhi's birth, or he passed away 40 years, he was born 40 years after Imam Tirmidhi rahmallah passed away? So the answer to that is that Allama Iraqi rahmallah was of the view that Imam Tirmidhi, he obviously knew that Imam Tirmidhi used the term. So he's saying that or he's of the view that Imam Tirmidhi rahmallah is actually using the term specifically for this book. He's not using it as an official terminology. So therefore, he's not saying that Imam Tirmidhi is the first to define Hasan, because Imam Tirmidhi is just for his own usage. That's how he's going to use the word, and therefore in his ilal, that's how he defined it for his own usage. But Allama Khattabi rahmallah, he made it as a definition to be used in the field of ulum al-hadith. And therefore, he is regarding Allama Khattabi rahmallah to be the first. Now here, an important point to take note is that yes, you have Allama Iraqi mentioning that Allama Khattabi was the first. You have Ibn Taymiyyah mentioning that Imam Tirmidhi was the first. But it should be noted that there were many scholars before Imam Tirmidhi rahmallah who actually used the term Hasan. So, like in the beginning, we said that generally scholars of the past would say Sahih or Da'if. But when you go through, you do find that there were those instances where they actually used the term Hasan. So Sheikh Awama done a detailed research on this, and Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda brought his old research in his Qawaid, in his Ta'liqat, the footnotes of Qawaid fi Ulum al-Hadith on page 100. And in fact there he mentions, Bahatha Akhi Tilmid al-Ams wa Zamil al-Yawm, that my brother who yesterday was my student and today he became to me like a bosom friend, Al-Ustad al-Sheikh Muhammad Awama fi Kalam al-Imamain al-Sheikh Ibn al-Qayyim wa Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahumullah ta'ala, al-manqul huna bahtan jayyidan. So Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahmallah is calling this here a great piece of research which Sheikh Awama done. So he brings there, if you've got the kitab, you can go through it, you'll see he proves that Ali bin Madini rahmallah, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, all of them, how they use the term Hasan. One thing with regards to this is that when he brought all these terms, then Sheikh Awama tried to prove that even though they did not have a definition for the term, but they used it in the exact same way like how Ibn Hajar rahmallah is going to explain here. That is what Sheikh Awama tried to point out in this piece of research of his. However, when you actually go through the narrations which they mentioned as Hasan, then you will find that the scholars of the past, for example, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, etc., when they used the term Hasan, then they actually used it interchangeably with Sahih. So they didn't use it like how Ibn Hajar is going to explain here. Rather, they used it, so sometimes they would call a hadith, they would define or grade a hadith as Hasan, and at other times they would grade the same hadith as Sahih. So for them, Hasan and Sahih meant the exact same thing. So maybe Hasan, they were using it in the Lughwi meaning, because obviously the scholars of hadith, they wouldn't talk Chinese or Japanese, they would talk Arabic. So when they talk Arabic, the word Hasan, they mean like it's a good hadith. They weren't using it as a terminology, they were using it in the Lughwi meaning. So this here is in contrast to what Sheikh Awama has proven. But you will see that there is a Sheikh Khalid al-Daris. He wrote a brilliant kitab in which he gathered numerous examples. He brought lots of examples to prove, and he went and he done such a detailed research. For example, Sheikh Awama, he just brings a few statements of Imam Ahmad rahmallah. Sheikh Khalid Daris, he says, وَقَدْ وَفَّقَنِ الْمَوْلَى عَزَّ وَجَلْ إِلَى الْوُقُوفِ عَلَى 67 نَصًّا. That from Imam Ahmad rahmallah, he managed to find 67 different statements where he used the word Hasan. So obviously he done a more in-depth research. In fact, Sheikh Awama praises this kitab of Sheikh Khalid Daris a lot. The name of the kitab is Al-Ḥadīth al-Hasan li Dhātihī wa li ghayri dirasa istiqra'iyya naqdiyya. So it is also available for free online. Inshallah, when we make the notes, then we put a link for the kitab there. So Sheikh Awama praises the kitab. Now obviously you have to have guts, to ask Sheikh Awama. So when sometimes when you're going to meet a sheikh, then you think, okay, when I meet him, I'm going to ask him a certain question. So last time when we were in Turkey, then we were thinking of asking Sheikh Awama that, because this you can see Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda is praising it, and Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda passed away in the year 1998. So that shows that this tahqiq which Sheikh Awama done was many, many years ago. In fact, the kitab, which was the print was in 1984. So this would show that it's long before Sheikh Awama done this research. And now Sheikh Khalid Daris wrote this kitab and Sheikh Awama praised it. So we wanted to ask Sheikh Awama that does he still hold that view that the scholars of the past have the same use the word Hasan in the same way as Ibn Hajar is defining or not? But when you go there, then you feel shy to ask. So that's why I never ask him. But nevertheless, in his ta'liqat, in his footnotes of Tadrib al-Rawi, it seems like he still holds the same view. So Wallahu A'lam. But the more correct view is this here of Sheikh Khalid Daris, because as you can see, he went through many more nuqul wa fawqa kulli dhi ilmin alim, obviously. So he went through he done a great, let's put it in this way, he dedicated his time because he was writing it as his risala to gain his PhD. So he put more time, he managed to dedicate all his time to this one terminology, and therefore his research was better. So this here is essential to understand that when scholars of the past use the term Hasan, then they didn't use it as Ibn Hajar is going to be defining here. Because when we learn mustalahat, then what's the reason for learning mustalahat? It's so that when we find there's two reasons. One is when we find statements of the ulama of the past, then we need to understand what they are meaning. So when you are now find that Imam Ahmad rahmallah is saying that the hadith is Hasan, then you shouldn't assume that he's meaning the same thing which Ibn Hajar is defining here. That's the first thing. And the second is how you yourself now, when you find a hadith and you need to grade the hadith, then what terminology to use. So yes, scholars after Ibn Hajar, actually after Ibn Salah started to use the term Hasan in this meaning. And Sheikh Alama Ibn Salah passed away in the year 643 Hijri. But before him, there were scholars who used. So if you look from Imam Tirmidhi, rahmallah, there are so many different scholars, they define the Hasan in various different ways. Some divide it in a rather broad way that commentators found it then difficult to distinguish. That is, giving the definition of Hasan like this, then what is the difference between Hasan and Sahih? So Alama ibn Salah rahmallah, as we mentioned, that he passed away in the year 643, so that's like more than 350 years after the Ashabus Sitta. So he now came and he focused on how Imam Tirmidhi used the term and how Alama Khattabi rahmallah used the term. Then he is the one who divided Hasan into two types. So Alama ibn Salah rahmallah. But when he divided it into these two types, he didn't give it an official name. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah, he takes the two categories of Ibn Salah rahmallah, and he begins to call the first category Hasan li Dhātihī. And this is where the term then became popular from him. So to check the definition of Al-Hasan li Dhātihī, so first now let us go through the text of Nukhbatul Fikr, because here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, Sheikh Ibn Hajar rahmallah begins to discuss other things. So in Nukhbatul Fikr, Alama Ibn Hajar rahmallah very comprehensively defines the first type of Hasan by saying, فَإِنْ خَفَّ ضَبْطُهُ فَالْحَسَنُ لِذَاتِهِ. That's very concisely to the point and with so few words. He defines it in this way here. But in his fatwa, he went into more detail. And there he defined the Hasan li-Dhātihī as, and you can see here using the term Hasan li-Dhātihī. So like we say that he is the one who is coining this term. He is making up this term here. And he's taking the category which Ibn Salah invented and is now putting a name for it. So in his fatwa, he went into more detail and he described it as هو الحديث المتصل السند برواة معروفين بالصدق في ضبطهم قصور عن ضبط رواة الصحيح ولا يكون الحديث معلولا ولا شاذا. This here, it's an الأسئلة الفائقة on page 63. So you can see that he mentioned 4 of the 5 qualities of Sahih, in which Hasan is exactly the same as Sahih. So the first is in ittisal al-sanad, just like how it was conditional in Sahih, that the sanad has to be muttasil. Likewise here for Hasan li Dhātihī, it's necessary that there are no missing links in the sanad. The second is just like how it was a requirement there that the rawi is reliable. Likewise here, the rawi needs to be reliable and adil. The third is just like how there couldn't be any shuduz there. In the same way here, there shouldn't be any shuduz. And the fourth is that like how there shouldn't be any hidden defects. So likewise here too, there shouldn't be any hidden defects. But then the fifth quality, where it comes to tamu dabd, this is where the difference come about. That in the condition of tamamu dabd, this is where the narration falls short. So this is the narrator here, he doesn't have such a good memory, and therefore the narration loses its status of being sahih, and that causes it now to go one level lower. So the name of this lower level is Hasan, and in this here Ibn Salam made two categories, and Ibn Hajar names the first category as Hasan li-Dhātihī. So to give you now a more precise definition of Hasan li-Dhātihī, Mullah al-Qari rahmallah, in his commentary on page 296, he says, فَتَعْرِيفُ الْحَسَنِ لِذَاتِهِ خبر الواحد بنقل عدل خفيف الضبط متصل السند غير معلل ولا شاذ فيهم. So he's saying that this is the definition. It's exactly the same as Sahih. Only difference is that in Sahih, the narrator had an excellent memory, but here in Hasan, he has a slightly defective memory. Now, we mentioned the word slightly defective. The reason for that is, Alama Qasim in Kutub Bughaya, he raised an objection, and he says, Al-Khiffa al-Madhkura ghair mandabita. You can see here when Ibn Hajar is mentioned, فَإِنْ خَفَّ الضَّبْط, that the memory should be weaker. So how much weaker should it be? It could either be having a slightly weaker memory, or it could be that a person has such a weak memory that he cannot even remember his own name. He doesn't even remember who his own mother and his own father was. That is what a weak memory. So when you use it like this here in such a broad way, then that is what it could mean. That you're saying the memory needs to be weaker. So he's saying that how much weaker should the memory be? How much is accepted? So the amount of weakness is not clarified. But Mullah al-Qari rahmallah, he tried to respond to this here, and he says, وَيُمْكِنُ دَفْعُهُ بِأَنَّ that he's saying that this here is possible to avert or to respond to this objection of Alama Qasim in Kutub Bughaya by saying that this here is mabniyun ala al-urf or ala al-mashhur, that it's based on urf, that when he said that khaffa dhabt, then it means little, that the memory should only be slightly weaker, and because ala al-mashhur, that this is how it is commonly known, that any student of Ḥadīth, if he has to pick up this kitab and if he has to read in khaffa dhabt, he's not going to think that it refers to someone who lost his memory in its entirety. Rather, he would know that it refers to a slightly defective memory. So that's the answer which Mullah al-Qari tried to give, and then he mentions the same things like what adala, that if you say a person has little adala, then it means maybe he just makes a sin now and then, few minor sins. And if you say a person is absolutely adil, then it means that he even stays away from minor sins, and we have discussed all of that in detail. In an-Naḍar, Alama Akram Sindi rahmallah, he responded to this here by using a text of Alama Zarkashi rahmallah, where Alama Zarkashi rahmallah used the quotation of Abu al-Hajjaj Yusuf bin Muhammad al-Salisi, al-Hasan ma lahu min al-Ḥadīth manzila bayna manzilatay as-sahih wa ad-da'if. So he's saying there that he's clearly saying that it is a level between sahih and da'if, and therefore the memory should not be as good as sahih and not as weak as da'if. But in all honesty, it would have definitely been better for Ibn Hajar rahmallah to define here and to clarify that the memory, when he's saying that khaffa dhabdi, meaning that it is slightly weak, especially that, as we said over and over, Ibn Hajar is mentioning in his muqaddimah that he is writing this kitab for beginners. So that breaks the whole argument of Mullah al-Qari. Then if a beginner, if someone who, this is like his first kitab, when he comes and he's going to read in khaffa dhabd, he's not going to understand that it's a slightly defective memory. He's just going to take it under Dhāhir al-Faz, and he's going to think that if the memory is weak, so that means no matter how weak it is, it will be a Hasan. So it is essential for Ibn Hajar to clarify. And if you look in his Fatawa, he, in spite of giving a more detailed definition, he even went into more details in explaining it. So there he said that أنه هو والصحيح سواء. He's saying that Hasan and لذاتي and Sahih are the same إلا في تفاوت الضبط. فراوي الصحيح يشترط أن يكون موصوفا بالضبط الكامل. You see, he's saying that it's for Sahih, he needs to have complete memory. وراوي الحسن لا يشترط أن يبلغ الدرجة وإن كان ليس عاليا عن الضبط في الجملة ليخرج عن كونه مغفلا وعن كونه كثير الخطأ. So there he's saying that he shouldn't have such a weak memory that he now continuously makes mistakes or he becomes negligent. Rather, he should have memory. So good memory, not an excellent memory. The point which he's trying to get at is the narrator has a slightly defective memory. He makes few mistakes, but in all other conditions, it fulfills the conditions of Sahih. Such a narration will be called Hasan li-Dhātihī. So this is the narration which Ibn Hajar rahmallah gave in Nukhbah. Now to go through the text here in Nuzha. So he says, فَإِنْ خَفَّ ضَبْتُهُ أي قَلَّ. He's now explaining that when he used the word khaffa, he actually meant qalla, that the memory is a little less. يقال خَفَّ الْقَوْمُ خُفُوفًا قَلُّوا. So here he's saying that, and he's going into the linguistic meaning of it. And the reason why he thought that it's important for him to explain the word khaffa is because the word khaffa can come in two meanings. One is khaffa can come in contrast to the word taqula. So taqil means something which is heavy. In that case, khafif will mean something which is light, something which you can carry like a feather. Or it could come in the meaning of being less. So therefore he's clarifying that here when he says khaffa dhabt, is not meaning that the memory needs to be lighter, it's meaning that the memory needs to be less, it needs to be a little deficient. So he clarifies that it's the second meaning which he is taking. Now here you might ask that, okay, then if that's the meaning, if he took the meaning of qalla, then why from the beginning you wouldn't mention the word qalla? So in Nukhbatul Fikr, instead of saying فَإِنْ خَفَّ ضَبْتُ, make it easy for everybody, you should say فَإِنْ قَلَّ ضَبْتُ. So the answer is that the word khaffa is much more broader in the sense that it covers both quality and quantity. Al-Imam al-Qari mentions وَكَأَنَّ الْخِفَّةَ اسْتُعْمِلَتْ فِي الْكَيْفِيَّةِ وَالْكَمِّيَّةِ. So therefore he thought that it's better to use the term. Al-Imam al-Qari rahmallah, he gives another reason, and this here is just mentioning it to show you how delicate and how intricate the Arabic language is. It says لأن القلة قد تنتهي للعدم بخلاف الخفة. That when you use the word qalla, then it could diminish, it could go less and less and less, it could diminish even more until it reaches null, it reaches zero. It goes until it falls so much that it cannot fall anymore. بخلاف الخفة. In khiffa it doesn't reach until adam, it does not fall till zero. So therefore he used the word khaffa dhabtu. Now Ibn Hajar is then clarifying that this is the only condition which is compromised. وَالْمُرَادُ مَعَ بَقِيَّةِ الشُّرُوطِ الْمُتَقَدِّمَةِ فِي حَدِّ الصَّحِيحِ. He's saying that it's essential that all the remaining four conditions that were explained when defining Sahih, they need to be fulfilled. So he's saying, فَهُوَ الْحَسَنُ لِذَاتِهِ. This would be called Hasan لِذَاتِهِ. Now here, he now goes on to explain the second type of Hasan. But he doesn't give the definition. Rather, he just goes and shows you how the first type of Hasan would contradict the second type. The differences between the first type, how the first type differs from the second type. And from there you must understand what the second type is. So, in Arabic they say, وَبِالتَّضَادِ تُعْرَفُ الْأَشْيَاءِ. That through opposites you come to know things. So here he's showing you the opposite, and from there you could come to know it. So he's showing you, this is the first type of Hasan, it's Hasan li-Dhātihī, like we say that he's the one who came up with this terminology. Now, in the next portion of his statement, he's going to discuss Hasan li-Ghayrihi, but he's not explaining it as a definition, rather he's showing you how it differs from Hasan li-Dhātihī. So again, here our point is that since the book is for beginners, this here is not the most ideal way to define something. Because now a beginner, he doesn't know that the Hasan is of two types, and you get Hasan li-Dhātihī and then Hasan li-Ghayrihi, and this is the definition of Hasan li-Dhātihī, and this is now the definition of Hasan li-Ghayrihi. So you need to explain to him all of that. So yes, he does later on in the kitab on page 105, if you've got the same nuskha as mine, and then on page 105 you will see there that Ibn Hajar rahmallah does give the definition of Hasan li-Ghayrihi. So you can imagine how far it is that here we are sitting on page 65 and he's on 105. that he's explaining. He's so going to discuss so many different things in between, and thereafter he'll say وَمَتَى تُوبِعَ السَّيِّئُ الْحِفْظُ بِمُعْتَبَرٍ كأن يكون فوقه أو مثله لا دونه وكذا المختلط الذي لم يتميز والمستور والإسناد. So he explains it there. But here he's just now showing you the difference, how it differs with Hasan al-Dhātihī, and from there you must use your own mind and understand the definition of Hasan li-ghayrihi. And then also another point, that in the beginning it criticized the tartib of others. So we wouldn't have mentioned anything, but because he criticized the tartib of others, so now we ask what's happening to your tartib here, that you are going to be discussing Hasan li-ghayrihi after so many pages. So he says, now in order to explain what's Hasan li-ghayrihi, he says, لا لشيء خارج وهو الذي يكون حسنه بسبب الاعتضاد. That the narration was upgraded. He's saying that it's not upgraded because of any, it did not become Hasan because of any exterior reason. And what he means by exterior reason, he's saying that if it became Hasan just because it had a supporting chain of transmission. So you imagine now how hard it is for a beginner. Obviously, if you've done already usul, now for you it's easy to understand what's Hasan li-ghayri. But picture yourself as a beginner now. You're sitting with this text here. لا لشيء خارج وهو الذي يكون حسنه بسبب الاعتضاد. Assume you didn't do no bayquniyya and nothing, and now you come and you sit with this. How are you going to understand here what's the meaning of بسبب الاعتضاد? So that's why we say this was not the most ideal way. Basically, what he's explaining is that Hasan li-ghayrihi is that which became Hasan. It was a weak narration initially, but because it had other supporting asanid, so you had a different sanad with the same meaning linking up to the same sahabi, so it supported it, therefore it strengthened each other. And because they both became strengthened, that's how it became Hasan. So that's Hasan li-ghayrihi. So in trying to explain that, he shows the difference that Hasan li-Dhātihī is the person had a weak memory, but he fulfilled all the other conditions of a Sahih narration. Hasan li-Ghayrihi is that narration which was initially weak. When you look at it, just that one particular tariq, you will say that it is weak, but because it have other supporting turuq, there are other chains of transmission as well which strengthen each other as a whole, then they become Hasan. So therefore they are called Hasan li-Ghayrihi. For this exterior reason they became Hasan, and the exterior reason is that it has these additional turuq. So he gives an example in this. He says, نحو حديث المستور إذا تعددت طرقه. He says, look at the narration of a mastur. Now, who is a mastur? So again, we're gonna inshallah discuss it in detail later on. But for now, so when Ibn Hajar rahimahullah was teaching this year to his students, then he explained to them like this year. He said, الراوي إذا لم يسمى كرجل يسمى مبهما. If you don't take the name of a narrator, you just say a man told me. رجل, like you can see, he say a man told me. Then that's called mubham. وإن ذكر مع عدم تمييز فهو المهمل. But say maybe a name is taken, but now you can't differentiate that name with another name. For example, take the name Muhammad. Now there are millions of Muhammad. If you say Muhammad told me, now which Muhammad could it be? So obviously in the field of Hadith, there's so many Muhammads narrating Hadith. Obviously if you're in one house and someone comes and there's only one Muhammad in the house and then they tell you Muhammad told me, you know which Muhammad they are telling you. But here in the field of Hadith, you say Muhammad narrated to me. Now there are so many narrators with the name Muhammad. So how will you differentiate between them? So that's called muhmal. وَإِن مُيِّزًا وَلَمْ يَرْوِ عَنْهُ إِلَّا وَاحِدٌ فَمَجْهُولٌ. If you can distinguish between that person saying Muhammad and say maybe he's taking a surname also, or saying Muhammad bin and taking the father's name, but you still don't know now who's this person. You don't have any scholar authenticating him, no scholar weakening him, no comment, no review from any scholar upon him. So, and you have one narrator narrating, then that is called majhul. وَإِلَّا فَمَسْتُورٌ. And he's saying that if you don't have only one, if you have two narrators narrating from this person who you don't know anything about, you know his name and you know his surname, but you don't know more than that. No, you don't have any scholar, because the reason why we translate the word illa like this here is later in the kitab you'll see Ibn Hajar is going to explain the mastur, and he also calls it majhulul hal there. He says وَإِنْ رَوَى عَنْهُ اثْنَانِ فَصَاعِدًا وَلَمْ يُوَثَّقْ فَهُوَ مَجْهُولُ الْحَالِ وَهُوَ الْمَسْتُورُ. So that's the meaning of a mastur, where you have two people narrating from a particular narrator, from a particular teacher, but no one knows about this teacher. So those two people, when they are narrating from this teacher, they are taking his name clearly, and they're even taking his father's name. They're even showing from which town he came from. They are trying to tell you who the narrator is, but no one knows about those people. So that is called a mastur. So when we come to the chapter, obviously we'll discuss Ibn Hajar. They will mention the ruling and whether we agree with that ruling of his or not. We'll discuss all of that in detail. So the point here is that he's trying to make he's trying in passing to explain and show you that it is that narration which is slightly weak. And there's much more to discuss about this here, so rather we'll discuss it, we'll continue from here on Saturday, instead of now hiding and then not explaining it properly. So inshallah, until Saturday, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.